Emily, a young woman, moves briskly between the crowded tables of the small diner where she works as a waitress. Her bright eyes and constant smile lit up her face like sunshine on a cloudy day, enough to bring warmth to anyone who walked through the door. The diner, nestled in a quiet corner of a suburban town, was known for its home-style cooking and cozy atmosphere. Its modest space featured a handful of wooden tables, a chalkboard menu showcasing the day's specials, and the inviting aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the rich scent of coffee that filled the air. Though simple, the diner was always bustling with customers, especially during the lively lunch rush. Emily, her green apron tied snugly around her waist, moved swiftly, balancing trays of food while greeting customers with cheerful remarks. Yet, behind her radiant smile lay a heavy heart. Whenever she had a spare moment, her eyes would flick to the phone on the counter, as if waiting for a message from the hospital where her mother was admitted. Her mother's condition was worsening, and the mounting medical bills were becoming an insurmountable burden. Every step across the wooden floor and every "thank you" she uttered to a customer were part of her tireless effort to hold everything together. Occasionally, in those fleeting moments of quiet while she stood at the counter, Emily would let herself dream of a someday, a day when she could finally open her own cafe, a place where she could welcome people with warm drinks and heartfelt stories. But that dream felt as distant as a star in the night sky, shimmering yet seemingly unreachable. The sound of the door chime broke through her thoughts, pulling Emily back to the present. Another busy day lay ahead, but she didn't allow herself to stop. Deep down, she held on to her belief that somehow, in some way, God would hear her prayers and deliver a miracle. It was the busiest part of the day at the small, bustling diner. The air was filled with the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversations, and the occasional sizzling sound from the kitchen. The midday rush was in full swing, and Emily, the young waitress with a constant, welcoming smile, moved swiftly between tables, balancing trays and jotting down orders with practiced ease. Suddenly, the rhythm of the diner was broken by the creak of the old wooden door swinging open. Heads turned briefly, as they often did, to see who had entered. But this time, the figure stepping inside held their attention for a little longer. An elderly man shuffled in, his gait unsteady, as though every step carried the weight of 1,000 miles. His coat, once perhaps warm and protective, was now threadbare, hanging loosely over his frail frame. His pants were torn at the knees, the fabric worn thin, and his shoes, scuffed and barely holding together, told the silent tale of relentless hardship. His face, deeply lined with the marks of time and struggle, carried a weathered dignity, though his downcast eyes betrayed a weariness that even the strongest spirit would struggle to hide. Yet, in the shadows of his tired gaze, there was a faint glimmer of something, hope, perhaps. Hope that the world might still hold a place for him, that kindness might find him here. What no one in the diner could have guessed was that this man, with his tattered clothes and unsteady movements, was none other than Donald Trump, disguised to experience the harsh realities of life as a homeless person. He had ventured into this unassuming diner, seeking something more than food, a connection, a glimpse into the humanity that so often gets overshadowed by wealth and power. The man hesitated for a moment as he entered, his eyes scanning the room before choosing a seat in the farthest corner. Away from the crowd, he sat with his head bowed, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if trying to make himself invisible. The lively chatter of the diner resumed, though here and there, glances of curiosity and judgment were cast in his direction. Emily, who had just returned to the counter to check her order pad, noticed the new arrival. Unlike others, her gaze held no judgment, only curiosity mixed with concern. Without a second thought, she picked up her notepad and approached him, Her steps were confident yet unhurried, and the ever-present warmth in her smile seemed to soften the tension in the room as she neared his table. "Good afternoon, sir," she said gently, her voice calm and inviting. "Can I get something started for you?" The man hesitated, his weathered hands resting on the edge of the table. He looked up at Emily, his expression a mix of embarrassment and exhaustion. His voice, rough and barely above a whisper, carried the weight of his journey. "I'm sorry," he began, his words halting. "I don't have any money. I just need some water. And maybe, if it's not too much trouble, something to eat. I've been walking all day." Before Emily could respond, a loud, derisive laugh cut through the air. From a table nearby, a man dressed in an impeccably tailored suit leaned back in his chair, his polished leather shoes resting arrogantly on the floor. His expensive watch caught the light as he gestured dismissively toward the stranger. "You don't have money and you walk in here? This is a diner, not a charity. Go beg somewhere else," the man sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. The lively hum of the diner came to an abrupt halt. Forks paused midair, and conversations died down as all eyes turned to the corner table. The stranger's head sank lower, his shoulders tightening under the weight of the insult. The wealthy man smirked, seemingly satisfied with the attention he had drawn, and took a leisurely sip of his drink. Emily stood frozen for a brief moment, caught between the cruel laughter of the suited man and the pleading, silent hope in the stranger's eyes. But the hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. Her heart, guided by an unshakable belief in compassion and dignity, quickly found its resolve. She knelt slightly, bringing herself closer to the man's level. Her kind eyes met his, and her voice, though soft, was steady and unwavering. "It's okay," she said gently. "Please have a seat and rest. I'll bring you some water and prepare a meal for you." Her words, spoken with calm confidence, seemed to carry enough weight to dispel the tension that had gripped the room. The wealthy man scoffed, muttering something unintelligible as he turned back to his plate. But Emily didn't spare him a glance. Her focus was entirely on the stranger. "Thank you," the man murmured, his voice cracking slightly. "Thank you so much." Emily gave him a reassuring nod and stood up, her steps quickening as she made her way back to the counter. She poured a glass of cold water, her hands steady despite the heaviness of the moment. Inside, she felt a quiet sense of peace, as though she had done something small but deeply right. A glass of water and a simple meal wouldn't change the world, she thought, but for one man, on this day, in this moment, it just might. And perhaps that was enough. Emily carefully carried a steaming bowl of soup to the table, accompanied by a soft slice of bread. The warm, savory aroma filled the air as she placed the meal in front of the man. She took a moment to look at him, her eyes filled with genuine concern and compassion. "Go ahead and eat," she said gently, her voice steady yet soothing. "Don't worry about anything. I hope this meal will help warm you up." The man hesitated, his rough hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. Slowly, he lifted his eyes to meet hers. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, gratitude, perhaps, or disbelief. Maybe it had been years since someone had shown him kindness like this. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then paused. Instead, he simply nodded and murmured, his voice barely audible, "Thank you. Thank you so much." Emily smiled, a soft, reassuring expression that seemed to say, "You're welcome here." She gave him a small nod before stepping back, leaving him to his meal. The earlier tension in the diner had all but dissipated. Other customers, who had briefly been caught up in the uncomfortable moment earlier, returned to their conversations, their attention shifting back to their plates and companions. The man picked up his spoon, his hands trembling slightly, and took a small sip of the soup. The warmth spread through him, more than just physically. It was as if the meal itself carried a piece of Emily's kindness, soothing some part of the weariness he carried. He tore off a piece of bread, savoring the simple meal as if it were a feast. Emily, meanwhile, stayed busy tending to other customers, but she kept an eye on the corner table. When the lunch rush finally eased and the diner grew quieter, she seized the opportunity. Pouring a glass of water, she carried it back to the man's table and set it down gently in front of him. "Here's some water," she said, her tone as kind as before. She didn't leave right away. Instead, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't speak at first, letting the silence linger, her warm smile encouraging him to take his time. The man hesitated again, his hands wrapping around the glass of water as if drawing strength from it. Finally, after a few moments, he began to speak, his voice low and unsteady. "I used to have my own company," he said, his words coming slowly, as if he hadn't told this story in a long time. "Everything was going well, but then I made mistakes, big ones. I lost everything, money, my family, my friends. It all slipped away. And since then, I've been wandering, trying to figure out how to start over." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "But sometimes, I wonder if someone like me even deserves a second chance." As he spoke, his eyes remained fixed on the table, but there was a fragile spark of hope in his tone. It was faint, but it was there, a part of him that still believed, despite everything, that redemption might be possible. Emily leaned forward slightly, her full attention on him. She didn't interrupt, letting him say everything he needed to say. When he finally stopped, she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "You know," she began, "I'm facing my own challenges right now. My mom is in the hospital, very sick, and the medical bills just keep piling up. I work day and night to take care of her and to try and make ends meet. Some days, it feels like it's too much, but even then, I still believe that God will guide me. As long as I keep going, as long as I don't give up." Her voice grew even gentler as she added, "I think we all need help sometimes. It doesn't matter who we are or what we've been through. Everyone deserves a little kindness to help them take the next step forward." The man looked up at her for the first time since he'd begun speaking. His eyes, though weary, now held something more, a mix of gratitude and understanding. He studied her face for a moment, as if trying to commit her words to memory. "You have a truly beautiful heart," he said slowly, his voice heavy with emotion. "Not many people would take the time to sit down and listen to someone like me. You've given me more than just a meal today. You've reminded me that kindness still exists in this world." Emily's smile widened slightly. "If everyone did just one good thing, no matter how small," she said, "the world would be a much better place. I'm just doing what I believe is right." They sat there for a while longer, two strangers brought together by fate. In that quiet corner of the diner, they shared their stories, their words weaving an invisible thread of connection and understanding. Neither of them knew it, but that brief conversation would leave a lasting impact on both of their lives. For Emily, it was just another act of kindness, small and unassuming, but for the man sitting across from her, it was a moment that rekindled a spark of hope he had nearly forgotten. The man finished the last spoonful of soup and wiped his mouth gently with a napkin, his movements deliberate, almost reverent. The warm meal had brought color back to his cheeks and, for the first time in what felt like days, a sense of calm to his weary spirit. Slowly, he stood up from the table, his trembling hands reaching to adjust the collar of his worn-out coat. The fabric, frayed and threadbare, hung loosely over his thin frame, telling stories of countless nights spent braving the cold. He hesitated for a moment, his fingers nervously smoothing the edge of his coat. Then, gathering himself, he turned to look at Emily. His eyes, tired but glistening, carried an emotion so profound that it seemed to fill the small space between them. Gratitude, raw, unfiltered, and deep, radiated from his gaze. Words struggled to form, but when they finally came, his voice was low and raspy, each word laced with sincerity. "Thank you," he began, his tone wavering slightly. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart. You didn't just give me a meal. You reminded me that kindness still exists in this world. You treated me like a human being, even when I had nothing to offer in return. I pray that God blesses you for what you've done." Emily, who had been quietly wiping a glass behind the counter, froze mid-motion as his words reached her. She placed the glass down carefully, her full attention now on him. Meeting his gaze, she saw the depth of his gratitude, and her own heart softened further. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with the quiet strength of someone who deeply understood the importance of such a moment. She stepped closer, leaning slightly over the counter, her voice gentle yet steady. "You don't need to thank me," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I'm just doing what I believe is right. Take care on your journey, and remember, tomorrow is always a new chance." The man stood there for a moment, as though her words carried a weight he needed time to absorb. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, he turned toward the door. His steps, though unsteady, carried a newfound resolve. As he reached the doorway, he paused again, resting his hand on the worn wooden frame. He turned back, his gaze finding Emily once more. This time, his eyes lingered, as if he were trying to etch her image into his memory. There was something almost reverent in the way he looked at her, like she was a light in a world that had grown dark for him. Then, without a word, he stepped out into the bustling street, his figure quickly blending into the hurried crowd. For a long moment, Emily remained still, watching the door swing shut behind him. Her heart swelled with a quiet warmth, not because of his gratitude, though it had touched her deeply, but because she knew, in her own way, she had done something good. It was a small act, perhaps insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but for one person, in one moment, it had made a difference. And to Emily, that was enough. The sounds of the diner slowly pulled her back to the present, the clink of dishes, the hum of conversation, the shuffle of feet across the floor. With a soft sigh, she picked up the glass she had been cleaning and returned to her work, her smile as unwavering as ever. She greeted the next customer with the same warmth, the same sincerity, as though nothing had changed. But deep down, something had shifted. Emily couldn't quite place it, but she felt it, a sense of connection, of purpose. Little did she know, the man she had just helped wasn't merely a weary stranger. He was someone who would soon impact her life in ways she could never have foreseen. Someone who would turn this small moment of kindness into something far greater. The following morning, sunlight poured through the diner's windows, casting warm golden hues across the tables and floors. Emily, her hair tied back neatly, was just finishing tying her apron. She glanced around the empty diner, mentally preparing for another busy day. The hum of the coffee machine and the faint scent of fresh bread set the tone for what she thought would be a typical shift. But just as she grabbed her order pad, the diner's manager called her name. "Emily," he said from the office doorway, his tone unusually serious. She looked up and noticed something in his expression, an odd mix of gravity and amazement that instantly caught her attention. "Can you come in here for a moment?" he asked, motioning her toward his small office at the back of the diner. Curious, and admittedly a little nervous, Emily followed him. As she stepped into the cramped space, her eyes were immediately drawn to the desk. On it sat a large envelope, thick and slightly worn. alongside a folded piece of paper covered in neat handwriting. The manager cleared his throat and crossed his arms, leaning back slightly. "The man you helped yesterday," he began, his voice carrying a strange mix of disbelief and curiosity. "He came back early this morning and left this for you." Emily blinked, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. "He did?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The manager nodded, gesturing toward the desk. "It's yours. Go ahead." Hesitating for a brief moment, Emily stepped forward and picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than she expected. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, unsure of what she might find inside. As she peeked in, her breath hitched. Stacks of crisp bills filled the envelope, more money than Emily had ever seen in her life. She carefully pulled out the folded note resting on top of the cash, her eyes scanning the handwritten words with growing astonishment. "Emily, your kindness has inspired me. Thank you for treating me like a human being, even when you didn't know who I was. You reminded me that there is still hope and goodness in this world. Please use this money to pursue your dreams. Donald Trump." For a long moment, Emily simply stood there, frozen. Her mind raced as she reread the note, her lips moving silently over the words as if saying them aloud would help her process what she was seeing. She finally looked up at the manager, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Donald Trump? Does he mean he's the Donald Trump?" she asked, her voice trembling. The manager gave her a slow, deliberate nod. "Yes," he said, his tone almost as incredulous as hers. "I couldn't believe it at first either, but there's no mistaking it. It was him. I don't know why he disguised himself, but he told me to make sure you got this." Emily's knees wavered slightly, and she reached out to steady herself on the edge of the desk. She took another look at the envelope, then back at the note, her mind replaying every moment of her interaction with the man. The weathered coat, the sunken eyes, the way he had thanked her so sincerely. It all came flooding back. She had thought she was simply helping a man in need. But now, the realization that he was one of the most influential figures in America left her reeling. I can't believe it," Emily murmured, shaking her head slowly. She clutched the note tightly, her fingers gripping the edges as if afraid it might vanish. He didn't even hint at who he was. He just needed help. The manager gave her a small smile. "Well, it seems like you made an impression," he said, "and it looks like he wanted to return the favor." Emily took a deep breath, her eyes misting as she held the note close to her chest. In a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Thank you, and thank you, God, for bringing him here." The room felt quieter than before, as though the weight of the moment had pressed pause on the world outside. Emily's thoughts raced. The gratitude she felt wasn't just for the money or even for the recognition. It was for the confirmation that kindness, even in its simplest form, truly mattered. After a moment, she looked at the manager, her voice steadier now. "This isn't just about me, is it?" she said, almost to herself. "It's about something bigger." He saw something in that moment yesterday, something that reminded him, and me, that there's still good out there. The manager nodded thoughtfully, letting her words hang in the air for a moment. "Whatever it is, Emily, you earned this, and I think you're going to do something incredible with it." Emily smiled softly, though her heart still raced with the enormity of the moment. She didn't yet know exactly what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. This unexpected gift was more than an opportunity. It was a reminder of the ripple effects of even the smallest acts of kindness. Dreams that had once felt distant suddenly seemed a little closer, a little more possible. And to think, it had all started with a simple meal, a warm smile, and the courage to see a person, not their circumstances. The money from the envelope didn't just clear Emily's mountain of debts. It brought with it something even more valuable: the rebirth of a dream she thought she had lost forever. In the first few days after receiving the unexpected gift, Emily was in disbelief. She would wake up at night, convinced it had all been a dream, only to see the envelope and its contents on her bedside table, reassuring her that it was real. But soon, the initial shock gave way to clarity. Emily began to understand that this wasn't just about money. It was about possibility. It was about the incredible truth that a single act of kindness could ripple outward, creating opportunities far beyond what she could have imagined. This was more than just a financial blessing. It was a reminder that hope, when paired with compassion, could inspire extraordinary change. Emily wasted no time. Every evening after her shifts at the diner, she poured herself into meticulous planning. She filled notebooks with ideas, sketches, and to-do lists. She researched locations, learning about foot traffic and rent prices. She spent hours imagining the layout of her dream cafe, right down to the placement of tables and the color of the walls. Every detail mattered. To her, this cafe wasn't just a business. It was a mission to create a space where kindness could thrive. During the day, she still worked her long hours at the diner, smiling at customers and serving meals with her characteristic warmth. But at night, she was building her future. Emily would sit at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her notebooks spread out before her, envisioning the day her dream would become reality. She wanted the cafe to be more than a place to buy coffee. She wanted it to be a haven, a space where everyone, no matter their circumstances, felt welcome and valued. Months turned into a year, and after countless late nights and careful decisions, Emily stood in front of a modest storefront on a quiet corner of town. The name Kindness Cafe was hand-painted on a wooden sign above the door, surrounded by blooming flowers in vibrant shades of pink and yellow. It was everything she had dreamed of and more. When the cafe opened its doors for the first time, customers were greeted by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the sweet scent of pastries baking in the oven. The interior was warm and inviting, with hand-painted artwork adorning the walls, pieces created by local artists and children from the community. Soft, golden lighting cast a cozy glow over the space, and every table was adorned with a small vase of fresh flowers. But what caught most people's attention was a small corner of the cafe where a sign was proudly displayed. For those in need, take what you need, no questions asked. That corner became the heart of Kindness Cafe. Emily made sure it was always stocked with sandwiches, baked goods, and beverages for anyone who needed them. No one was ever turned away. The corner embodied the spirit of the cafe, reminding everyone who walked through the door that kindness could be found even in the smallest gestures. It didn't take long for the cafe to become a beloved fixture in the town. Families gathered there on weekends. Friends met for coffee, and individuals seeking a quiet place to work or read found solace within its walls. A little boy from a struggling family came by almost every day for a glass of warm milk, his shy smile growing a little brighter each time. An elderly widow often sat in the corner, reading for hours with a cup of tea by her side. Strangers who had nowhere else to go found a warm meal and, perhaps more importantly, a sense of dignity. Word of the cafe spread quickly. Customers shared stories about the kindness they had experienced there, and soon people from neighboring towns began to visit, not just for the coffee and pastries, but for the atmosphere of warmth and goodwill that Emily had so carefully cultivated. Her story, too, began to circulate. The tale of the waitress who had helped a stranger, unaware that he was Donald Trump, inspired countless others. The walls of Kindness Cafe soon became covered with letters of gratitude from all over. Notes from people who had visited the cafe, as well as from those who had simply heard about it, filled the space. Emily read each one with a full heart, often moved to tears by the impact her little cafe had made. She never expected her small act of kindness to ripple so far or touch so many lives. But it had. One quiet evening, after the cafe had closed for the day, Emily sat on a wooden chair by the window. Outside, the golden hues of the sunset bathed the street in warm light, and inside, the cafe was filled with a peaceful stillness. Emily leaned back, a cup of tea in her hands, and gazed out at the horizon. Her thoughts drifted back to the journey that had brought her here, from the simple act of helping a man in need to the incredible transformation of her life. She whispered a prayer of gratitude, her heart full, gratitude to God for guiding her steps, gratitude to the extraordinary man who had crossed her path, and gratitude to herself for never giving up on the belief that goodness and compassion mattered. Though she couldn't predict what the future held, Emily knew one thing for certain: Kindness Cafe was more than just a dream come true. It was a living testament to the power of small, selfless acts, and a reminder that even the simplest gestures could change the world. Kindness, no matter how small, holds the power to change not just a life, but also the way we see the world. Emily's story is a vivid reminder that God quietly works through those who are willing to love and share, even when they don't know if their kindness will ever be returned. Donald Trump, through his unexpected journey, learned that the true value of a person isn't in their appearance or the wealth they possess, but in how they treat others. In Emily's simplicity and genuine compassion, he saw that kindness isn't just an action. It's a light that can illuminate the darkest corners of life. This story reminds us of the transformative power of kindness and encourages each of us to seek out and practice small acts of goodness. Because sometimes, even a single act of kindness can be the seed for miracles far greater than we could imagine.